Okay, I'll do this and then I'll scoot it over. Okay. Hello, my name is Gina. I'm with Complete Healing for Your Mind, Body, and Spirit. A lot of people have commented and sent messages concerning my spirit attachment video. They've even asked me to expand on it besides when my spirit attachment video discussed what it's like to be attached by a human spirit. But I'd like to expand on that via all the questions that have come through YouTube. So some of the things that we're going to talk about today is what is it like when the land has an attachment, the very land that you might live on, that you might work at, your house, your work environment, the actual structure has an attachment. And can attachment, besides attaching to you, can it just follow you around? Today I have with me my son Michael, who's here with me as well. And I'm going to scoot this way so you can see us both. And my son is actually going to do part of this video with me. A lot of you know that I'm a psychic medium, I'm clairvoyant, I'm a physical medium, and people contact me for various things. They contact me for spiritual guidance, insights, spirit attachments, cleansing, house cleansing, and things like that. My son does come with me when we do a lot of these things. If I have to go on location. So some of the things that we'd like to talk about that needed to be expanded on were kind of twofold. So in the first video, spirit attachments, we explain what it's like to have a spirit attachment. How do you know you have it? What is it like to actually have it removed? So my son is going to expand on that a little bit. And then what is it like when you see a non-human entity? That my son has had personal experience, and he'll explain all that to you. But let's take the first part of it. So the first part of what people have asked about is the difference between having a spirit attachment, which is attached to you, versus having an entity follow you home, having the attachment to your actual property, the area that you live on, your land, or having an attachment to your dwelling, your home, your workspace, any physical structure. So a lot of times people have attachments and they do affect us. They have they do have effect on our psychological, our spiritual bodies, our mental bodies. I mean, just like I explained in the spirit attachment video, there are so many people in jail right now that say, oh my gosh, they got all this evidence and they say I did it, but I have no recollection of doing it. Literally, a lot of them, because most times drug and alcohol induced, had an attachment literally where the entity was able to take temporary possession of the body and commit whatever crime or whatever it was that they did. And that's very prevalent. But a lot of times, some attachments, because of our very nature, those people that are sensitives, that are psychics, that run a lot of kinetic energy, end up being like this light beacon for entities, both physical entities or human entities and non-human entities. So literally, by their very nature, they become like a beacon and things follow you around. So how can you pick up some of those stuffs? Well, a lot of those things can happen almost anywhere. We know hospitals are notorious. Those are the one place where you have life and death literally in the same building. And because there's so much life coming in and there's so much death happening at the same time, and most of the time people in hospitals are heavily medicated at an altered state of consciousness. It's notorious for spirits, both physical, both non-human and human. So a lot of people tend to get attachments there. Then there's also places like graveyards. Any sacred ground would be, or hallowed ground would be a place where a lot of entities are not at rest necessarily by choice. Some are by choice. They choose to stay earthbound, and some are not. Some just don't realize they passed. And so a lot of cities, probably even yours around the country, around the world. I live here in the San Francisco Bay Area. An area of San Francisco called the Richmond District is notorious for that. Literally, that whole Richmond District, that whole area that is now all homes, was actually a graveyard at one time in the early, I believe it was 1900s, I believe it was. And now they're all homes, and we get contacted by people complaining of, strange sounds, and that would be an example of how an area like your land would have an attachment. And that would literally be, it could be a poltergeist, it could be an entity that has not chosen to pass over. It could also be residual energy. Residual energy tends to typically be more associated with a physical dwelling, such as your home or your workplace, for an example. Let's say your home, if you lived in a home where people were very loving and very kind to one another, the house might feel very inviting. It might feel very comforting. But if you lived in a home where there was a lot of anxiety, there was a lot of anger, there was a lot of hostility, the environment, the structure absorbs the environment. And those are called residual energies, and those are the things that you feel. A lot of times entities will come, and if they have those kind of feelings, they follow you around, they're attached to you, you might feel that way. So those are kind of some examples of, so now can your attachment be attached to both your land and your structure? Absolutely. You could have two different things going on. You could have something residual from the land and then something in the structure, as well as have attachments. That's sometimes, I know it sounds, you know, a little far-fetched, but in fact that's exactly what we run across. So I'd like to introduce you to my son Mike, who has had his own spirit attachment. Son, why don't you tell them what it was like? I kind of explained to them when you had a spirit attachment, but why don't you talk about how long it was that you had your spirit removal, what was it like, and how did you know you had one?
Didn't really know I had one, just happened to had a friend over that knew how to do it, and I said, let's do it for kicks and giggles, so I did. Come to find out I had one. It was a military soldier from the Civil War. Pretty much just did it and was under hypnosis, saw the person, he showed me what he wanted to show me, and then after that he moved on.
Did you have any physical symptoms in your body that you noticed from this particular Civil War soldier?
Yeah, for a while I was having shoulder pains. I thought they were like just regular pains like you would have any, you know, growing pains. Come to find out those actually stopped. So that was a big shocker for me. Now, you know, it's different now for me, so, you know, it just feels a little bit different. It just feels different now that from having one to not having one. And then you got, you know, you got demons and stuff I've seen about 2 or 3 times already.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Let's talk about what's it like when you actually see a non-human entity, and that's something my son can actually speak on. So why don't you tell the story, son?
Well, pretty much I was waking up in the morning about 2 years ago, and I saw a demon. It shocked me because you're used to seeing these horror flicks and all that stuff, and you're just like, oh wow, look at this thing that they created here. Then actually seeing something that looks similar to that, but face to face, is definitely a life changer.
So describe him. The moment that you saw him, you're 6 foot tall. So how tall was this entity in retrospect to you?
6 foot, 6'1", something like that. It was pretty tall. Mind you, I was laying down. He was transparent.
Did you see any identifying colors of any
Yeah, kind of a red.
Oh,
a red, but he looked more like not human features like you would see in the books. More of like a a creature look than usual. So had horns. I didn't know.
How big were the horns? Can you show us on?
They were like.
So like they were pretty tall, and they were sticking straight up.
Yeah, they had a curve to them.
Oh.
So, shocked me. I totally just bounced. Like I had my bed on the floor, so I shot to the wall, which I usually sit by the window.
Yeah.
And was just looking at this thing and just took of all, like, I can't believe I saw this. And the thing happened to turn and look at me and was shocked that I could see him, and went into the wall. And then a week later, one of our friends came over and he got possessed.
That's the other thing. When my son says he got possessed, that's probably was not the right verbiage. What happens is, let me turn this camera. What happens is a lot of people that have a non-human entity attached to them, And doesn't mean they have physical possession of the body yet. It means they're working on it. But they do tend to visit locations. In this particular instance, this person was going to come and stay with us for about a week and then was going to leave. But a week earlier, this particular attachment came over to visit ahead of time, just kind of scope out the area, so to speak, and the people in it. And unfortunately, my son has seen that. I, too, have seen my share of things as well. Some of the ways you know that you have like a home visitor or a tag-along, when we say an entity can follow you home, you'll see almost a shadow figure. It's almost looking like a human body, but kind of not fully, the resolution isn't full, so they might seem gray in appearance. That's why they call them shadow figures. You might see something peek out of a doorway behind something. You might notice. That kind of gives you a good indication that you know, somebody might have followed you home. So saging is always a very good idea. We keep in my house, we keep white sage. You can purchase this at most in most metaphysical bookstores. You can get them at any sort of native place, Native American. Whole Foods here in California sells them, so that's very good. We also use white candles in our house. White stands for purification. We have salt. We use Himalayan pink salt and water. We keep all those together, and it keeps our area clean. We also do meditation. I meditate daily. We do chakra balancing, aura cleansing. Will help actually strengthen your immune system. And actually, your immune system, we think of vitamins, right? We think of vitamins, but in fact, that's only part of it. Your immune system starts even before what's in your chemical body. Your immune system is your auric field. So unless you can clean out your auric field, that's your first line of defense. Because if you think about, what do they call it, Star Wars, where they have, you know, that actual, you know, barrier, that's kind of what your auric field is. So if you can strengthen your auric field and have your aura cleaned, that will be the first indication of being able to withstand, or withstand something attaching itself to you. Especially if your energy is nice and clean and your auric field is very strong. That is your first line of defense. That is your immune system. So that's a couple of examples. Did you want to expand on any of that, son?
Sometimes places like small towns may also be, the whole town can actually be not possessed or any of that stuff. More like a curse almost. Yeah. I've moved to a small town before, and
tell them the small town.
Pretty much, a small town in New Mexico. But basically, the whole gist of it is that sometimes small towns, there's so much stuff that's happened that it just feels weird. You know, you just don't feel right. And the weird thing about it is that this town, for the smallest population that it had, was only 2,000 people. Or, yeah, no, about 2,000 people. And it had a very, very high domestic abuse problem.
Violence, yeah.
So
what was interesting, this would be a good example of an actual land residue and land attachment. This particular place in New Mexico was all Apache land. We're Apache Indians and Chiricahua Apache. And so when you come into Indian land, the land actually vibrated. I remember when I went there, I said, son, this land vibrates. And that's what's interesting. So when you have, in a land that being real, that has heavy residue and thickness on it, you will actually feel it. And so that would be a perfect example of a land attachment. And depending upon what's attached to the land, I mean, a whole, you know, as we all know, anything that has Indian residue and you're not of native blood, you can definitely feel the effects of it depending upon what was going on there. In this particular environment, like my son was saying, it's the highest domestic violence rates. So
for this town, they also had a shelter for women in general. And I was, you know, I'm a very conversating person, and I went and talked to everybody I could, just talking, chit-chatting. And what really, now because I moved back, really I sit back and I think about it, that most people had the same, almost exact story. Okay, which would be two people, a couple would go there and live there for a little bit. All of a sudden, have all these problems, get into a domestic abuse case that maybe doesn't even make it to court. Just happened. They got into a big old altercation, and pretty much one person left the town, the other person stayed, and is still there to this day. And there's tons of people that I know that same story happened to them, and I'm talking to 2, 3 different, 4 different, 5 different people, and it happened to really be weird. It just doesn't seem right to have the same story with 3 different people, and then also happen to yourself. And it's different. It's not right. It just doesn't feel right.
It doesn't feel normal.
No.
Normal. Well, my senses isn't. So, well, a lot of times what happens with attachments, as we've just explained, both human form attachments and non-human, is you have what's called psychic attack or oppression. So you can Google those on the internet. There's a lot of information out there. So once the entity or the residual, attachment attaches itself to you, you will feel drained. You'll feel chronic pain. A lot of people get sudden bouts of depression, sudden bouts of anger. I would say they would act like he said, it's not normal. I didn't feel right. And that's literally because it's not you. It's something that's oppressing you. You're under what's called psychic attack. And that's, kind of being exposed to whether they followed you home, or whether your home is on some land, or the structure has, already had a residence, so to speak, in there. And those are some tall tale signs of how you can identify if you're living in a structure, or you're working in a structure, or the land that you're now on, that you've moved to, doesn't feel right, doesn't feel normal, feels thick, maybe vibrates. You'll notice a lot of hostility, different things like that. A lot of people get very, very sick, literally physically ill. During this time, migraine headaches are a common occurrence, right? Yeah. And then a lot of times shortly after, you'll begin to see little entities or shadow people, or in my son's case, non-human entities. And that's kind of a tall tale sign about that. So if any of this sounds familiar to you, anybody going through this, you've went through this before, you want to see if you still have an attachment. And the reality is, unfortunately, there's not a human being walking on this planet with at least a minimum of 2 attachments. Most of them are benign. Most of them are just, little souls that haven't crossed over, for whatever the case is. Very few of them are non-human entities, but they are very real. So by all means, if you care to reach out to myself or my son Michael, you can find us here. You can message us here at YouTube. Okay, or if you're in the San Francisco Bay Area, you can find me on my Facebook page, Complete Healing for Your Mind, Body, and Spirit. I'm also on Yelp. My email is down here in my Yelp on the bottom of the video. You can send your contact information. We'll be happy to assist you with any removals of any questions you might have. A lot of times I help people from around the world. Literally what I found is a lot has to do with transits that they're going. A lot of people happen to be very sensitive, happen to be psychics, and they just weren't aware of it necessarily. So it's a combination of having psychic experiences and then being in environments that had entities as well. So like I said, if any of this sounds familiar, by all means reach out to us, and we'll be happy to help you from there. Okay? Hopefully that answered all your questions. If it did, wonderful. If it didn't, if you still have some more, feel free to reach out to us. Thank you, and have a great day. Bye.